Scott here. It's been a bit, about 4-ish months. We got a lot to talk about. For starters, the election is 2 weeks away from the day I'm recording, which today is, in fact, Tuesday, October 25th. Midterms are in 2 weeks. A lot has happened since this last show. We got to talk about a lot of things. We're going to talk about abortion strategy, Biden, A Lago, what's going on in Eastern Europe and Ukraine. Gas went down for a bit. It was looking like it was doing good. Now it's skyrocketed again. Now it's going down again. Biden did something. Martha's Vineyard and DeSantis. The Dow was down. Inflation, economy, China. Everything is happening. You're listening to Capitol Hill Landscaping with Scotty. Here only on KWOO. Now, let's get into the nitty-gritty. So, during our hiatus, the Supreme Court reversed the Roe v. Wade decision. The Supreme Court decision, brought about under the Carter administration, protected abortion by the Constitution. And thus, it being reversed, abortion is no longer a constitutional right. Now, what does this fully mean in effect? Well, several states have already instituted basically a complete ban on abortion, while other states have strengthened it, in a sense. Now, specifically what this decision does, it doesn't make abortion illegal on a national level. What it instead does, it gives the decision back to the states. So now this is a states' rights or a state's issue that varies state by state. And what are the ramifications for this? Well, of course, the Democrats now had a rally cause to rally behind. They didn't really have anything for the most part. They were kind of getting their butts whooped in the greater culture war for better part of first half of the year. Then the decision came around. They actually had some momentum, and according to the RCP, or the Real Clear Politics polling average, the Democrats actually held a majority in the generic polling ballot for a bit over all of September, actually. But as we see now with more recent polling data, that I guess I'd call it like a Roe v. Wade surge is kind of back down. For various reasons, of course, but essentially the Democrats are now full frontal about abortion. It's their main campaign issue this season, and basically saying, oh, the Republicans won't govern as good as we will. President Biden has made numerous statements as basically saying, I'm paraphrasing, of course, but like he's basically said, if Republicans get elected, the economy will get worse, is his basic standpoint that he's been kind of parading around. However, if you live, say, like on a West Coast state, or like, say, if you live in Oregon, hypothetically speaking, if, say, Republican nominee Christine Drazen, I had a hard time. I thought her name was Dryzan for the longest time. I'm not great with English, but it's the only language I speak. Anywho, Christine Drazen is she's a pro-life candidate. However, the likelihood of her making abortion illegal in Oregon is next to none. She can't do anything. The reason why is because abortion in Oregon is a constitutional right, i.e., it's in the Oregon State Constitution that a woman should have access to an abortion. Now, the fact that the difficulty of passing an amendment on the federal level should make it easy to understand that it's even harder to do it at the state level. Unless, of course, you do a ballot measure, which, if you don't know what a measure is basically a form of direct democracy. Like Oregon, for instance, we have 4 measures on the ballot this year, all of which are not to be decided by the legislator, but are to be decided by Oregonians. It's a rather interesting concept because it's the purest form of democracy that I have seen in this country. or I guess I should say within Oregon itself, because I'm not very knowledgeable on how measures are state to state. However, I just know that it's the only time of the year really where the people get to decide policy. And I guess for Oregon's case, it's easier to do that because it's a smaller population. You're able to know results quicker, collect ballots easier, and so on and so on. Now, talking about gas prices. Well, we know if you are unfortunate enough to live on the West Coast, if you're somewhere in the South by chance, you're probably fine. Gas is $3.20, $3.50 a gallon at the most. Oregon went up to $5.20 in my area the other day. It's back down to $4.92 a gallon the last time I checked. However, I'm still a little upset about that personally. You know why? Because it is pretty expensive, even if you drive like an economic kind of vehicle, like I do. Like, it's about $50 to fill up the tank. Now, if somebody so happens to have a bigger car that requires more gas to power it, then obviously they're going to be more impacted by it, of course. Now, why is this the case? Why are gas prices going up, and why are they going down? Biden actually tweeted earlier today, in fact, about saying how the gas average is around the 350 benchmark, the average that is. However, it's important to note that a solid, I want to say even third, or really a fourth, well, basically the entire West Coast is basically dying for gas. Now, there's many reasons for this, obviously. I mean, the biggest reason is just importation. I believe it's like half the cost of gas is entirely dependent on just transporting it, not even like its production. So all of California's gas, or at least a large chunk of it anyway, has to go through a harbor, which is awful, basically. It's like that basically guarantees the price to be higher than $1. And then Oregon, most of its gas it goes from Portland and flows basically throughout the rest of the state. I was actually watching a video about how we might be expecting the big Cascadian earthquake, which would basically screw over the entire Pacific Northwest for the most part. And how basically saying, since our point of entry for all our fuel in Oregon is kind of on the mouth of the Columbia River, it would create probably the worst wildfire in human history. Well, not in human history, but like in North America. The worst wildfire in human history was, sorry about that. I hit the mic by accident. A little quick, I guess, fun fact, but the reason why the Australian outback exists is because the native people there accidentally burned the entirety to the ground. I.e., the Australian outback used to be this very lush, beautiful jungle, much like the Amazon, and then it burned to the ground and has never recovered since. So, excuse me for using hyperbole, saying, oh, this is the worst wildfire in human history, when it's clearly not. Like, picture the Amazon fire, but except when not there's like a few points and places that are on fire, but like the entirety of Brazil basically is on fire. That's basically what happened in Australia. Anywho, other funny news about oil, not really funny, haha, but funny, interesting. Our strategic reserve of oil is, we're almost dry. Like, we're almost completely gone of it. Biden is basically releasing strategic reserves to keep prices down just enough so maybe his party can retain some momentum or hold on barely by any means necessary. However, this has come to a great cost, I would say. Not in terms of just strategic value. The U.S. is not producing as much oil as it was. The shale oil revolution has kind of dwindled down. Production has been cut back. OPEC, the Organization of Oil Producing countries, basically said, yeah, we're slashing by 2 million barrels. We're cutting production that much. Basically meaning guaranteeing the price of oil will most likely go up mid-November, early December, I'd say. I'm predicting personally probably I will have to pay $6 a gallon at some point. Not enjoyable. Not in the slightest. So, what's a solution to fixing gas prices? Well, there's really two options for President Biden because gas prices is on everyone's mind. It's important to note that when it comes to literally any election, the majority of people will vote based on economics. You look at pretty much every trend of why an incumbent lost economics. Like Trump, for the most part, along with a bunch of social unrest, lost because of COVID and basically how it screwed over his entire working. Basically, he exploded the economy and then it went downhill for there. People couldn't work, and then basically a lot of people's lives were absolutely ruined. And so you blame the guy on top, obviously, and then bada bing, bada boom, Biden gets elected. Anywho, Biden, what he can do if he wants to bring down the price of oil, he has a few options. One, incentives, not really that great. Basically wiggling his fingers saying, "We'll produce oil," but it's probably not realistic. Then there's a foreign way, basically acknowledging the leader of Venezuela, I believe his name is Maduro, and basically opening up formal relations to then invest in that country's oil infrastructure in order to bring down prices, or nationalize America's oil companies and basically force production. If he doesn't do any of these, then he's essentially a sitting duck for the most part. There's not much he can do, especially since the strategic reserve is almost completely empty. But like I said, it's on everybody's mind. Economics. Gas prices is just one part of it. Cost of living has gone up. Oregon landlords are able to raise rents by a whopping 14% this year, which is astronomically high for a lot of people who are already struggling financially due from either the pandemic or inflation. But enough about economics for now. Hold on just a second. We're going to go back to a few months ago, a very interesting event. So Trump has basically, when he left the White House, he basically went into exile in A Lago, a fancy resort house that he owns in Florida. And it just so happens that a few months ago, this home was raided by the Federal Bureau of Investigation for the reason of possession of classified documentation that Trump wasn't allowed to have. Now, obviously, the backlash of this was immense from the GOP, who basically saw this as a targeting of Trump because Trump, as of now, stands as kind of the favorite for the 2024 Republican nomination, and that has been solidified for the fact that yesterday there was the Florida governor's debate where DeSantis basically said, "I'm not, if I get elected governor again," because he's running for re-election this year, he's staying for that 4 years, meaning a hypothetical DeSantis presidency will not happen until 2028. Anywho, basically, the raid on Mar-a-Lago was seen as partisan politics. The FBI wasn't really super clear at first. There's an interview with Trump following the raid. There's also an investigation by the New York Department of Justice that has launched into the investigation to the former president's business dealings. All that good stuff. Has not really how is this affected? Well, so far we don't know the long-term consequences of this because this is an ongoing investigation. Reporting will continue on it, of course, and I'll bring you updates on it if you're listening to this. But this is a rather ongoing event that could have impacts on 2024 for sure. Speaking of, or mentioning Governor DeSantis again, there's been a spike in immigration, and thus, if you haven't been following, Governor Abbott of Texas and Governor DeSantis of Florida have been they've been shipping migrants that arrive to the states, or I guess specifically Texas or Florida, and then they bus them to either, say, New York, for example, where the mayor of New York has declared a state of emergency because now you now have to deal with a massive influx of people coming to the city. And the city just does not have the resources and is not capable of handling such a dramatic increase in population. However, of this trend, which was kind of like an underground, it wasn't really an underground, it was just kind of like, oh, they're busing migrants to basically northern states that are hardline blue states, effectively. Of these, Governor DeSantis sent a plane, like a small private jet, to Martha's Vineyard, which is like this very, very bougie, like liberal area. Like I believe the Obamas own a house there. Several other like high society celebrities own homes there. But they arrive. DeSantis essentially just dropped them off in Martha's Vineyard, and then the migrants were like kicked out or like relocated like 2 days later. Now this increased an enormous backlash, and there was an investigation launched to say, hey, is this even legal to do on DeSantis' part? Still ongoing. Not really seen any updates on that as of yet. Anywho, we got going away from the U.S., we have an update on the Eastern Front, or Eastern Europe, or more specifically, the war in Ukraine. Now, the war is still ongoing. It's raging on. Tensions have escalated quite a bit since our last reporting. As I last reported, the Russia was kind of stalled. It was kind of very much a static front. Russia wasn't pushing, or if they were pushing, they were maybe capturing like a mile per day of territory in Ukraine. However, Ukraine made massive offensive gains, launching a counteroffensive in the northeastern region of the country, basically undoing 5 months of Russian progress. Essentially recapturing more territory in like 2 weeks than Russia did in the previous 5 months of the war. In reaction to this, President Putin has decreed a partial mobilization to fill in gaps in the front line, and has also issued nuclear threats alongside it. Not looking good, Biden commented. We are closer to Armageddon than in the 1960s Cuban Missile Crisis. Not an amazing time to be alive. In other news, President Lukashenko, the current dictator of Belarus, might join in with Russia kind of more officially and reopen the northern front once more. If you don't remember, Russian troops invaded northern Ukraine through Chernobyl at the start of the war and were in the suburbs of Kiev, and they invaded through Belarus, either or. Interesting to note, however, is Iran has been giving suicide drones to Russia, and a new appointee to basically by Putin to lead, essentially a new commander-in-chief of operations in Ukraine, have seen a massive increased bombing of the western portion of the country, knocking out lots of power grids and effectively trying to sort of terrorize the country in a way, while also kind of trying to demoralize them. And all of this has caused global tension to rise. And we shall see how it develops in the coming months. I'm holding out hope for peace, but we'll see. Heading more to, North and Southern Europe, we had 2 elections in one non-NATO state and a NATO allied nation of the U.S. Sweden and Italy have both elected right-wing parties to head government. Basically, the Swedish left-wing coalition had lost to the Swedish center-right coalition that has been spearheaded by the new Swedish Democrats Party. Not really new, but essentially it's a party that has surged within the last decade. along with the Swedish Democrats, the Brothers of Italy party in Italy are leading are leading the other right-wing coalition in Italy. Now, why is this the case? Well, there's two main reasons. It's a reaction to mass immigration to Sweden and to Italy, and then also from economic woes that the previous governments were unable to handle. Now, this could predict a more global trend, however, in European politics. However, Macron won his re-election against Le Pen in their rematch, which Le Pen was kind of the leader of, right? Speaking to note, I should mention what a coalition is of government. So in pretty much every European country, there are multiple parties. There aren't just two parties that dominate the electoral system and government like we have in the US. So the Swedish Democrats, if I'm remembering correctly, they received 28% of the vote, which is not enough to hold a majority or to control government. So they have to ally with like-minded parties to form a government, which then means that a prime minister is elected. It's a similar thing of how the UK is a very good example, except not, because the UK has had the Tories and Labour basically dominate elections forever. Speaking of the UK, we have quite the interesting conundrum happening. I should mention that Queen Elizabeth II has passed away, sadly, and her son, King Charles III, has taken up the throne of England, the first king in 72 years. Now, I guess by some correlation, or I guess not really some correlation, UK has not been doing too hot. The Tories, or the Conservative Party, had won a major re-election in the previous election cycle. However, their government is kind of in a bit of a shakeup, a little bit. Boris Johnson, who took over after former Prime Minister Theresa May resigned, took on leadership of the Conservative Party of Britain. However, due to failed COVID policies and economic troubles, he was also forced to resign, leading to a internal election. You see, when a prime minister in the UK resigns, the Conservatives still control the country. They just have to internally elect a new prime minister. Because the prime minister basically, in theory, enacts the will of the king, but is chosen by the party to lead, leading to the 44-day prime ministership of former Prime Minister Liz Truss, who then resigned. And then, after Liz Truss resigned, there was another election, which seemed Boris was about to take again. He had the necessary votes to re-enter power once again. However, there is after Boris dropped out, what's his name? Rishi Sunak is now the incumbent prime minister who will succeed Liz Truss and lead the Conservative Party. He will be the first non-white prime minister of the UK, leading to a rather interesting observation some have had, how the Labour Party, who's very socially left-wing and a very heavy promoter of immigration, have basically is lacking in terms of prime ministers, not doing well in that category in terms of diversity. Whereas the Conservative Party have had 3 female prime ministers and now have elected the first non-white prime minister of England. Excuse me. Let me sip of water. However, how will Rishi Sunak lead? We don't know. He's coming in. However, this is quite the unprecedented shakeup in leadership, so we'll see if he stands firm and is able to lead the UK in a better way, in comparison to Liz Truss, that is. Anywho, back stateside, we got some big boosters. Not really boosters, but like some big things to talk about. If you remember from if you've listened to the show last year, or not really last year, but a few months ago, I always ragged on Biden on how he could instantly improve his poll numbers by legalizing marijuana and forgiving student loan debt. Well, he's actually done both, except not really, if that makes sense. So Biden has launched a student loan debt forgiveness program up to where, depending on your status, what kind of grants you've taken, you can get up to $20K in student loan debt forgiveness if you qualify, and has also signed off on the release of any non-violent possession of marijuana. However, both acts have failed and have not really failed, but have been met with scrutiny by basically everyone, all sides. The progressives, the conservatives, everybody's upset because it's either does too little, it does too much, it's not good, it's bad, etc., etc., etc. He is not catching a break. Like I said, if he wanted to boost his numbers indefinitely, he would have wiped the slate clean with student loan debt altogether, or completely made marijuana legal. However, the release of nonviolent drug offenders hasn't really seen that many prisoners released, as there are far more, as it turns out, a lot of drug possession cases also included some other secondary charge that would not be annulled, for example. So, regardless of whether the criticism faced by Biden, his approval rating has jumped up. It's now sitting in the low 40s, which for president in the 21st century, it's not bad. It's okay. It's been better. It's not as good as his when he first was elected in office, but that ship has sailed, long gone by now. Kamala, however, is still less popular than Dick Cheney. Unsurprisingly, it's not surprising she's less popular than Christian Bale. It's a movie reference. Watch Vice. It's a really good movie. However, yeah, Kamala has, her approval rating has not gone up, even though Biden has, per se. But we shall see. It'll be interesting to see if they remain on the same ticket next year, or if she'll get replaced by another re-election candidate. Because it's not unprecedented to basically say, oh, I want to run on this ticket instead. Like, that's not uncommon. Because Biden can definitely run for re-election and choose somebody else. Like, he can choose Pete Buttigieg or something along those lines. Excuse me. Now, heading back to the West Coast, heading back to a bit more locally, we're looking at a very interesting midterm cycle for Oregon this year. As you know, our three frontrunners for governor this time around are Christine Drazan, Tina Kotek, and Betsy Johnson. Excuse me. Surprisingly of all, Drazan has been polling the highest out of the three for the past few polls. There was one that put Kotek at a +8. However, in comparison to a total polling average, Drazan is still up ahead by around 1 to 2 points. This comes mainly out of, but Betsy is acting as a Democratic spoiler, as she has more policies in common with Kotek than she does with Drazan. It's kind of getting worrisome for the Kotek camp and campaign, as in President Biden had to make a stop in Portland the other day to basically raise support for Kotek. Now, here's why that's bad. If a sitting president has to campaign, or if you need politicians to campaign for you in a state that you won by 16 points in the last election, that's not a good sign. Like, practically, it's just not a great sign. In terms of my personal, where I've traveled, took a trip over the coast, which the coast, despite being a more rural area, is traditionally a liberal enigma, if that makes any sense. because when we think of rural versus urban, we always associate one with the other. But in Oregon, the coast is always pretty liberal in most cases. And while on my trip, I was in Astoria checking out the film museum. I saw basically not a single Kotek sign, but I counted at least probably 40 Betsy's, meaning that Kotek, in terms of polling, we won't see until the actual election day when we can get a fancy schmancy map. We'll see a very interesting map look-alike. Is it possible that Betsy could win? I wouldn't say count her out. There's always a chance. Don't say, oh, no chance. There's always a chance. Any one of these candidates can win, per se. After all, polling is always not accurate. There was only one poll in 2016 that predicted Trump would be president, which was, to pretty much everybody, a shocker at the time. So, in terms of polling aggregate sites, 538 and RCP are showing favor to Drazen winning. An interesting point to note is that Phil Knight, founder of Nike, namesake on the Phil Knight Stadium in Eugene, has both given $1 million to both Drazen and Johnson. Why is this? Well, Drazen and Johnson are both running on campaign of fiscal responsibility, i.e. less government spending, less taxes. For Phil Knight, that'd be good. I guess those Cortez shoes coming in supplying the campaign funds this time around. Quite interesting indeed. Going back to more national level, Democrats, we touched on this earlier today, but in terms of just general midterms, the Dems were up in all of September. They got up to, I believe the highest they got up to was about 1.8 points, nearly a 2-point nearly 2-point lead in the generic ballot over Republicans, which, if that was the case, you apply that to the election, would basically mean government Democrat control. However, that is flipped. Republicans have seen a massive surge beginning at the start of October, and it doesn't seem to be going or slowing down anytime soon. RCP is predicting 3 GOP Senate pickups and 3 GOP governor pickups, as long as GOP control of the House of Representatives. Now, out of easily the most interesting race is the Senate race in Pennsylvania, i.e. the Yeti man himself, Fetterman versus Dr. Oz, famous medical celebrity in his field. Now, what's interesting to note is that Oz, for most of the campaign, has been down by solid 5-6 points, most polls shows. Now he's only down by 2 in a most recent poll that I've seen. Other states, Nevada is a toss-up. It can literally go either way. Nevada is probably one of the key races for this election style. Then we get to Georgia. Georgia is a very, very interesting case. Now, if you don't remember, Georgia had a runoff election along with a separate Senate election that happened a month after the midterms happened. Basically, the GOP lost both Senate seats in Georgia, basically solidifying the 50-50 Democrat control in the Senate. Now, why am I mentioning Georgia? Well, Georgia is a very interesting case. Herschel Walker, the Republican nominee, has been the subject of controversy. However, this controversy isn't impacting his polling, at all. It's strange. A lot of controversies, say, for example, Mike Erickson, who I've seen countless political ads saying that he's pro-life, but he had his girlfriend had an abortion, and that's kind of like a center target to target him from winning in Oregon's 6th district, which is, I believe, last time I checked, still a toss-up to a lean, i.e. a 1% Democrat margin. It's insane. It really goes to show that in terms of economics will trump social issues in terms of how people vote in an election cycle. So basically, what I'm saying is essentially people will ignore social policy for economic policy above all else. And this is kind of just a given. Foreign is another thing. However, in terms of foreign policy, the center of attention is obviously Ukraine. But both parties are pretty unanimous in their decision to want to keep funding Ukraine's war effort against Russia for basically the strategic reason of, well, we can just sell them old equipment, and at the same time, Russia, who we haven't really had the greatest relationship with, can basically drain itself trying to fight in Ukraine. Now, in terms of 4 states, I say, obviously, if you're in Oregon, you're going to care about Oregon. But other states on a national level, Pennsylvania, Georgia, and Nevada are probably the 3 most key states this election cycle in terms of the Senate control. If the Republicans have control of the Senate, Biden is essentially going to be a more lame duck president than he already was. What I mean by that is basically Biden's strengthening, like, Save America, Build Back Better agenda has been severely watered down. They were able to pass it. They were finally able to convince Senator Manchin to agree to sign off and vote for the bill. However, it's a very, very watered down version of what was originally promised, which is good. He passed it. However, it's not going to be good in the future, as in somebody, say, opportunistic wants to run again in 2024, take the Dem nomination from Biden, which, in my opinion, is very possible. I.e., the Kamala Biden ticket was really only so strong because there was this basically a united coalition to get rid of Trump. However, since Trump is, at the moment, no longer in office, that coalition is kind of dispersed, and there's really not a united front anymore to where somebody can easily take the mantle from Biden. In terms of Bernie's successors, Fetterman, who I had my eyes on because he seemed like the potential inheritor of Bernie's movement, he suffered a stroke, actually, if you don't remember. He suffered a stroke literally like the day of he won the Dem nomination for Senate in Pennsylvania. And so it'll be rather interesting to see how he acts. However, there's been a lot of questions about Fetterman's health, and I believe that's also contributing to his poll number. I.e., you have this guy who's like sick guy. He's not doing too hot. He's doing okay, and then he's running against this doctor who's like this wonder man of medicine and nutrition, diet, and stuff that's been on TV for like 15 years or whatever. Let's see here. If you remember earlier, the Elon Musk Twitter deal still happening. He hasn't bought it yet. He's going to buy it. He's made a promise to cut 75% of the staff of Twitter, which a report would see a complete, basically, destruction of Twitter's content moderation team. The deal, as the original amount, is still standing, and an investigation has been launched into Musk and his business shenanigans with the Twitter buyout. Musk is one of the richest men in the world. Not history, I should add. Molly holds that title for now over Octavian and Rockefeller. So the Musk Twitter deal kind of is raising alarms among some people, i.e., Elon Musk is Twitter. It's always hard to pronounce that. I'll just call him Elon. Elon's platform for Twitter, so far, basically, he wants to make it a Wild West internet site. From my understanding, that's what he's planning on doing. But we shall see how that turns out for him. Just hasn't gone through yet, at all. In other news, Russia has rejected Brittany Griner's appeal, meaning she will most likely face 9 years in prison for the most part. Tom Brady basically sacrificed his family to lose to the Panthers and to lose to the Steelers. So he's not doing too hot. I want to say thank you for tuning in this week and listening to me babble and talk about various and serious events happening, in the country, in the state, and up and down, and pretty much everywhere. Honestly, thank you so much for tuning in. Please check out our other programming that's up on KWOO Voices on Spotify. Check out our website, kwoo.com. You can just find it by just Googling KWOO in Google. It takes you straight to it. You can check up our schedule there too, what programs and shows we got lined up and going. I'll be back same time. If you're listening to this live, it will be Tuesdays at 3 p.m., except for the notable exception on the November 8th. In that case, it's going to be the Wednesday after the 8th, i.e. the 8th is election day after all, so I'm kind of going to be pretty busy with that. Thank you again so much for tuning in, and if you're listening live, back to your regularly scheduled programming.